5, 6. I probably should have brought like a tactical bandolier or something, but 7, 8. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we're going to take a look at one of my cool firearms that is not actually historically correct. I've accumulated a number of interesting custom guns over the years, and I thought it'd be fun to do a little bit of video on them, because they're all interesting in their own unique ways. So, I refer to this as a Remington Auto-8, which is a designation that never actually historically existed. The Remington Model 11, which is what this shotgun is built on, was Remington's license-built copy of John Browning's Auto-5. Originally, the Auto-5 was manufactured by FN in Belgium, but there were tax and tariff and import issues that made it not so competitive for FN to try to sell the guns in the United States, and so Remington acquired a license to manufacture guns for the US market. Hence, we have the same gun being made by two different companies, FN for Europe primarily, and Remington for the United States. Winchester, notably, was left out in the cold on this one, but that's another story. They had their Model 1911 that was kind of a terrible attempt to duplicate the success of this. The Auto-5 would turn out to be one of the most popular, well, the first civilian auto-loading shotgun, one of the most popular auto-loading shotguns for decades and decades and decades. It was a fantastic firearm and primarily used in the civilian world. There wasn't very much military and police use of it. A little bit. The United States government bought Model 11s during World War II, but this was primarily for pilot training. There was an experiment with a military one in World War I. That's a separate issue we'll get into later. But in general, this was primarily a 5-shot gun with like a 28-inch barrel. And there was actually even military use of that configuration. So when the British were fighting in Malaya after World War II, they actually used a number of shotguns, including Browning Auto-5s, or FN-made Auto-5s, and those were actually full-length guns with 5-round magazines. Some of them probably had their barrels cut down a bit in the field, but they weren't a specially made version of the gun. Early on, FN had actually manufactured a version it called its messenger gun, which was a 5-shot but relatively short-barreled, essentially a riot gun version, but that didn't last very long in the catalog, and it wouldn't be until the 1960s or 1970s that FN actually introduced a specific higher capacity police model. And that was the police model. It's notable on the bottom of the receiver where the serial number is. Those are marked POL for police. And the big difference was FN took the handguard that's normally about this long, they extended it to be almost the entire length of the barrel, and they extended the magazine tube underneath to hold 8 shells instead of 5. So, with all of that background, what I have here is a Remington Model 11, which was never actually made in this sort of configuration, but I picked it up super cheap at a gun show because it was broken. It was a 16-gauge gun, apparently, and it didn't run, and the seller was asking something like $150 for it. It was really cheap, and I figured everything seemed to cycle properly. It couldn't be that hard to fix, right? This was many years ago. So what the heck, I'll take it. Turns out it was extremely easy to fix. It had been a 12-gauge gun all along. The previous owner had been trying to run 16-gauge ammunition in it, and it didn't work, shockingly. Turned out when I actually measured the bore and went, say, this is actually 12-gauge, and put 12-gauge ammunition in it, it worked very nicely. Now, at this point, it was a pretty rough condition, beat-up gun, commensurate for the price that I paid for it. Well, not that long after, actually a year or two after, I found this handguard and its matching magazine tube on Gunbroker. And I recognized what they were. This is actually an FN extended police model handguard and magazine tube. And I thought, bingo, that's going to be awesome. We're going to turn my beat up, grungy Remington 11 into a copy of an FN police model Auto-5, or as I'm now calling it, my Remington Auto-8. The problem was, well, first off, I paid about twice as much for the handguard and the magazine tube as I did for the gun in the first place. And then when I got them, it turned out, yeah, there was some fitting and some tweaking that was required to actually make this magazine and handguard fit onto a Remington 11. And I wasn't up to that work. So I sent the whole thing off to the wizards at Vang Comp, and they assembled this thing for me. So let's go in a little closer, and I'll show you a couple of the other details that they did to it. Alrighty, so this is Remington, not FN, not Browning, and the whole thing, when it was finished, was given just a dull gray Parkerized finish for me. The handguard was painted black when we got it, and so we opted just to leave it that way. The stock on here is the original stock from the original beat-up model Remington 11 when I got it. You can see that there was some lacquer on the stock, and it's worn off in a bunch of places, and we just left that alone because it doesn't really matter. It's a gun that's going to get kind of beat up. Now, that said, I did have Vang Comp shorten the stock a bit. Shotgun stocks for sporting guns are often really a bit too long to be proper usable combat guns, and so we cut that down and then put a nice recoil pad on it. At the same time, I had Vang Comp put sling swivel in the bottom of the pistol grip, so rather than have it back here, we've got it right up on the bottom of the grip, and then a matching sling swivel out here on the magazine cap. So that sling is a really nice way to keep the gun handy, especially at shotgun classes or matches or anywhere else where you may need to have your hands free to do other things, like deal with ammunition management. One of the differences between the FN Auto-8 and the Remington 11 is that the Auto-8s, at least early on in production, had a magazine cutoff lever here. The Auto-8 does not, for what it's worth. When you find these, by the way, when you find the original Rhodesian Army combat versions, they will be marked with an RA and a 3 or 4 digit serial number on them, both on the bolt itself and on the receiver. So there is a little bit of a way to distinguish between those. Now, this has the early style of safety from the Remington 11, which I don't really like. It is kind of similar to the M1 Garand, where pulling back on this is safe, pushing forward on it is the fire position, but it's in the trigger guard and it's a little sketchy. So that's one thing that I would still like to improve on this gun, but I don't know if I'll really get around to it at any point. One of the other issues with it originally is that the Remington 11 follower you could only load the gun when you were actually holding the bolt release button down. So you'd push the button, hold the button down, and then you could depress the elevator here and load cartridges in. And trying to do that with, well, you couldn't really do it with one hand, and it was really quite awkward. And so Vang replaced the Remington lifter here with a later Auto-8 one, a Browning one, that allows the gun to be loaded without having to hold down that button. So that was really a very handy improvement to the gun. The barrel here is 24 inches long, which gives me just enough extra length to clear the magazine tube. Remember that this is a long recoil action, so the barrel is actually going to reciprocate to about here every time it fires. And in fact, that's what this black mark is. That's paint from the handguard rubbing on the barrel as it cycles. We have just a plain bead sight on the barrel. This is fine. It could be interesting to put rifle sights on it, but we opted not to do that for the time being. Vang was also kind enough to acquire a spare barrel for me and fit it out with a reproduction Vietnam-era duckbill choke. Because, man, you put a duckbill choke on a Remington Auto-8 and it takes a really cool gun and just kicks it up even one notch further. I have some video on testing and shooting this, which I'll link at the end of this one in case you're interested in it. But this remains my spare barrel. The standard barrel is, of course, the one that Vang put on here because Vang Comp, one of the things they do is a barrel treatment where they recut the chamber of the barrel to reduce the amount of, basically to reduce the friction or the interaction between the pellets as they go through the forcing cone into the main body of the barrel. And what that does is dramatically tighten up groups with buckshot. And this will shoot a very nice tight pattern with double-aught buck, which is like if you've got a proper shotgun like this, a combat shotgun, one of the things it needs to do is fire a tight pattern so that you have maximum effective range with the gun and know where all the pellets are going to hit. I think that pretty well covers all the features and the improvements that we made to the gun. So let's take it out to the range for a moment and put a couple of rounds through it just for kicks. Definitely more than you get on your typical Auto-8. it's a really fun gun to shoot. The end result here, I think, is just a really cool, fun shotgun. I wouldn't make any particular claim to it being a match for, a modern tactical shotgun. It's a long recoil gun. There are certainly downsides to that. It's a particularly heavy gun, but man, it is quite a lot of fun to shoot, and it's a real head turner at the range, and I'm very happy to have it. I think it's really, really neat. And I enjoy taking it out to things like shotgun classes, and if I ever find another good shotgun match to go to, it'll definitely be going to that with me as well. It's interesting to note that there has been, despite there never really being that much commercial sale of this style of gun, it's been manufactured over the lifespan of the Auto-8 by a number of different people who were, generally speaking, gunfighters who recognized the quality and the reliability and the effectiveness of the Auto-8 as a basic platform. The one that most comes to mind is Charlie Askins, who was a U.S. Border Patrol agent in the 20s and 30s. Kind of a psychopathic murderer, sort of. He killed a lot of people and wasn't particularly concerned about it, and wrote a couple of books, in particular an autobiography called Unrepentant Sinner. And one of his very favorite guns was, in fact, a Remington Model 11 in this configuration with an 8-round magazine tube and a barrel cut down to just over the length of the magazine tube. He did that actually before FN was making their police models. He recognized what was a standard 5-round gun and thought, well, it's easy enough to put a magazine extension on that one way or another, and used one of those fairly extensively. So just an interesting historical comparison there. Anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. I thought it'd be neat to talk about a couple of these custom guns that show up on Instagram and elsewhere from time to time. If you liked it, let me know down in the comments, and perhaps we can do a few more. Thanks for watching.